now the mandates have come, the mask mandates have come to an end. There are many people in Portland vowing to continue masking. My guess is that won't last, but it will be interesting to see. But nonetheless, there are at least 3 things about the way this mandate has come to an end. I believe what happened is the narrative collapsed and they were forced to lift the mandate because it was too obvious, it was too much of a regular joke that, you know, you need to wear your mask as you're walking to the table, but once you sit down, you know, our joke was, you know, that you've descended out of the COVID layer and you're now seated at the table. But the point was, COVID is like tiramisu. Right.
It comes stratified.
Well, this goes back to what we were talking about last week, where they had us in a mindset where it was like, you're making an effort. And both you're putting on your mask to walk to the table and taking off your mask when you get to the table are effort.
Well, but it's also, well, maybe I have someplace to go here, but you were on a roll.
So I just want to point out that at the point that the narrative had come apart and it became clear that the masks were not effective at controlling this virus, they decided to lift them. But even in lifting them, it was evident that this was about control and not about epidemiology. And the places that you can see that. So first of all, the mandates themselves, right? Are masks valuable? Well, the cloth ones don't appear to be, right? So if you were going to have a mandate, you could mandate masks that stood a chance of actually controlling the virus. To the extent that the mandates were just that you need to mask, then that's clearly about effort and not epidemiology.
Well, and it's again, the sneeches with stars on their bellies versus the sneeches without. Like, do you have a public indicator of compliance? Can we see that you are willing to comply?
Right.
We're long since past. You know, early on, people, including us, thought that they were effective, and I was, you know, it was disturbing to see masks worn badly. Like, you know, really, you know, it's going to be below your nose, or you're going to poke a hole in it in order to play the clarinet. Like, you know, these pictures that have shown up, like who is thinking through this at all, right? But over time, you know, there's so many people who were just wearing them sloppily, such that it was patently like there could be no epidemiological story that made sense. It was just about, are you being a good little person or not? Are you complying?
It's the inverse of the yellow star. Right.
The
Nazis
Star of David,
forcing Jews to wear a Star of David to label them effectively as lesser people. Right. In this case, it was a twist on that, where the idea was the masks indicate that you were a good person. And that was obviously nonsense, because they didn't make an attempt to limit it to places where the masks actually stood a chance of being useful, or to limit it to masks that might actually be useful. And then at the point that the narrative fell apart around these people, and everybody was joking about the absurdity of the mask policy, right? They didn't do what would reasonably have been done by anybody who understood that there was a downside to the masks, right? A downside for children, for example, developmentally, right? They didn't say, okay, mask mandate is over, effective immediately. This is a mandate that took nothing from the point of view of architecture. You didn't need anything. There was no, you know, you didn't need crews to go out and do anything. You just needed to declare it over. And so instead what they did is they said, okay, a month out, the mask mandate will be coming to an end, as if that has anything to do with science. And then, the narrative crumbled a bit faster than they were anticipating. And so they moved the date back on us, proving that the initial date, which was a month out, was completely arbitrary in the first place, right? So,
well, I mean, it's a little bit, in this case, I have even less justification, but, you know, we used to joke that mosquitoes obey international boundaries, because if you were traveling through Central America, you were going to need your malaria prophylaxis in Nicaragua and in Panama, but not in Costa Rica, because Costa Rica is malaria-free. And somehow Costa Rica is malaria-free, but of course so are the areas of Nicaragua and Panama that are near. And maybe, I don't know, actually maybe at this point Panama is entirely. And
the canal zone is.
The canal zone is, you know, so probably not the border. Yeah, actually, Bocas still has some. Bocas del Toro Archipelago, I think, still has some malaria. Anyway, I don't remember exactly what the status is, but basically the idea was, you know, there is this disease that is highly transmissible, that is vectored by these animals that we know, and we've got one country in the middle of a bunch of other countries that seems to have eradicated it. So there ought to be, you know, they ought to benefit from having done this job, such that if you were trying to travel there, you know, if Costa Rica was trying to build its tourism industry, which it was, and it did so well, and it's, you know, it's a great place to be, both to do research and to just travel around and explore tropical ecosystems. You don't need, nor should you need, to be worried about malaria prophylaxis while you're there. But the idea that you could be standing on one side of the border versus the other and need a different thing, need a different prophylaxis, is obviously imagining that borders are more discreet than they actually are. Well, and you know, this feels a little bit like that.
I don't think so. My recollection was that as you crossed from Nicaragua into Costa Rica, you had to show evidence that you had prophylaxis. In other words, you had to display your bottle to them. And if you didn't have it, they made you buy it and take it on the spot. And so from the point of view of Costa Rica, you know, to the extent, was it perfectly absent from Costa Rica? I'm sure not. Yeah. But was it very well managed in Costa Rica? It was. And so to the extent that Costa Rica can't manage Nicaragua's malaria problem, but it can manage Costa Rica's, you know, where do you get the opportunity to do that but at the border? And so, you know, was it perfect? No. But, you know, even the arbitrariness of what seemed to be a border that the Mosquitoes presumably did not respect was about the fact that, well, you know, it's the least arbitrary place to do it.
Yeah, I wasn't actually thinking about traveling by land between the places, although that is in fact how we went between them. But you know, if you're back when I used to consult the CDC and thought that they really knew what they were doing, and would occasionally be talking to the consulting nurse for tropical disease at the CDC about, no, actually I'm going to this region of this country, and so it's going to be a different species of malaria, and your notes don't say that, so I'm going to have to figure out my own prophylaxis regime. It was about, like, if you're flying in to San Jose versus flying into Managua, Costa Rica versus Nicaragua, having, very different, actually mandatory, I think, at that point, things about what you needed to get into the country when, in fact, they share a border and the mosquitoes don't care.
Yeah.
Is just, feels a little arbitrary. It's not arbitrary. It just reveals that we have categories for things, and the categories can be real, but the borders that we put in place look far less fuzzy than they actually are.
All right.
So there was one more thing that I wanted to pick up on. I don't even remember what you said that prompted me to think about the way that the schools are responding to the mask mandates. And I just want to share the first 2 paragraphs of an email I got from the Portland Public School System yesterday. And you can show my screen if you like, Zach. It says, "Dear PPS families," this is again Portland Public School. On Monday, Portland Public Schools, along with the majority of Oregon school districts, will follow the guidance of federal, state, and county officials and make face masks optional in schools. We know this is a big step for all of us, and that some families will choose to continue to have their students wear a mask. We urge everyone to practice understanding and compassion. Everyone, masked or not, should feel like they belong, regardless of their own personal decision around COVID-19 safety, including the use of masks. Each family has its own circumstances and deserves respect. Please know that our staff will not attempt to influence your decision on masking and will create safe, inclusive classrooms that respect each individual decision. The rest of the email continues in that sort of framing, finishing with reminding us that, of course, getting vaccinated if you're 5 years old or over is the best way to prevent, to keep you and your community safe. And then they have some links to some materials that you can go over with your student that are clearly designed for, like, elementary school students, even though they're sending it to high school parents of high schoolers, and really pretty insulting to the intelligence of people. But in it, they remind us, for instance, that in, I think it's all, but it might just be most Portland public schools, people like us, the unvaccinated against COVID, are not actually allowed to go onto the campus for more than 15 minutes at a time. And this they want everyone to practice understanding and compassion, personal decision-making, respecting each individual decision, with regard to masks, because they are very certain that they need to keep people interested in wearing masks. And if they're scared, then the Portland Public Schools are not going to talk to students about how fear damages the ability to actually make conscious, smart decisions in the future. They're going to encourage the fear. They're going to encourage the fear in the language of understanding and compassion and inclusion. And at the same time, they're going to maintain their policy of not letting people who are adults, the students they have not mandated the vaccines for in the Portland Public Schools, they are not going to let the parents of students who have rejected this particular plan by the health authorities as a way to protect yourself against disease, which they're now saying the boosters last 3 months of that. They're not. That's not an option. We don't get to visit our children in school, but we need to practice inclusion and compassion and understanding as we continue to see people masked unto eternity. And at one school, we've heard that 90% of the students say that they're going to keep wearing masks.
So what we really have here
90%
is you have a scientific phenomenon, an epidemiological phenomenon that has an actual nature. You have something that has hijacked the response to it and is using things that plausibly interact, right? Is a vaccine relevant to controlling a pathogen? In principle, yes.
Not if it doesn't block transmission.
Well, right. That's why I say in principle, yes. So the point is, in principle is not the same as this vaccine that you happen to have that says on the bottle it's for COVID is going to be effective. In fact, we know it's not.
Right.
And has unknown risks because it's so brand new.
Yep.
But the basic point is what you've got is a public school left with no proper mechanism for navigating.
Yep.
What exactly is a public school supposed to do when they have been unwittingly drafted into terrorizing their own students over a pathogen using masks? What are they supposed to do at the point that the government, without explanation, lifts those mandates in a way that clearly suggests this has nothing to do with epidemiology? They didn't mandate N95 masks in the first place. They mandated masks. They then set an arbitrary date for removing the mandate. They then moved that date. They are announcing to us that this is about their control over us. What is the public school supposed to do? Public school can't very well do what we've done and call out the governmental authorities and say,
they cannot.
You're behaving in an arbitrary, non-scientific way, and we can tell, right? What are they to do? They've, advocated and in fact enforced the mask mandate on students, despite the harm developmentally that will come to those students for not having their mouths visible to each other for years of their lives, right? How are they supposed to deal with it? I guess the point is the level to which the message that this is about your safety, the level to which that penetrated people's minds varies. And now on lifting it, what they have done is they've given people an option. But really, the school's job is a developmental job. Yes, that is partly analytical, but it is also about learning how to be in the world. That school has a moral obligation to discourage the use of masks to the extent that they are not forced to require them. The developmental value of having everybody visible so that, here's the hidden thing. We humans have very specially evolved musculature in our faces to exchange very subtle information about, emotion. And to the extent that might have been in conflict with a novel virus floating around, fine. But to the extent that we now acknowledge that this is not an effective policy for controlling this virus, then we should actively discourage people from wearing something that blocks it because it is in their educational interest in every regard for them to get all of the messages. Because frankly, these kids have catching up to do.
Yeah, they do. They have a lot of catching up to do, and they have catching up to do with regard to all sorts of social interactions, and that includes, therefore, also one of the other policies that was widespread, which was about physical distancing, which was at first called social distancing. They tried to sort of rebrand that, but it really was between the masks and the Zoom school and the distance mandated between students and the basically no rough and tumble play, not even a touch at all, ever, For, what about for the students who come from homes where they don't get anything? Right. Then you just destroyed a lot of children. And so the mask mandates are lifted. How about also letting kids hang out in small groups again? How about letting them actually, laugh uproariously at lunch and occasionally, do a spit take? That's never a good idea, but like this is part of what growing up is.
Well, I think the thing is, I don't like patting ourselves on the back here, but the right thing to do was to assume a pathogen that could transmit in many different ways. And then upon discovery about what the actual mode of transmission was and what was actually useful, to withdraw everything that wasn't justified by its utility in controlling the virus. And so the point is, from very early on, you could have said, kids, be normal outside, right? Yes. Indoors, wear a jacket, we're going to have the windows open, whatever it was that you needed to do. But the point was, as we literally said, more than 99% of the world is safe from this. Why are we telling people that the entire world is dangerous? That's about keeping them in fear for reasons that have nothing to do with controlling a virus.
Yeah. So exactly. The messaging was simultaneously, if you care about other people, you will do everything we say. And the way that we are going to get you to do that is you're going to think it's due to your own compassion, but we're actually going to scare the bejesus out of you about everything. The entire world is a dangerous place. There are crazy, crazy viruses lurking around every corner, and you just there is no help for it but to trust us, because you can tell we got the credentials in the background and we're the adults here, and boy, could we use some real adults.
Yeah. Now, I do wonder what bejesus is and how it got into us, but it's not good that suddenly...
I've always wondered, but yeah.
But it's the kind of question you don't ask. Well, most people don't ask.
Yeah. I don't know if I've ever even said it before.
I don't think you have. I certainly haven't been around. All right. I
was trying not to swear.
You did a fairly good job. Yeah.
I don't think bejesus is an epithet.
Chuleta.
Yeah.
That's how you avoid saying terrible things in Spanish, as you say.
At least in Panama, yeah.
In certain places. So I did one last point, is that I think that the arbitrariness of the end of the mask mandate here, which is, as you point out, not by any means the whole thing, because the vaccine mandates lurk behind them and the like. But some places are dropping. There's a theater marquee somewhat near us that for months now has said, vaccine required, and that disappeared. And it's been many, many months, maybe well over a year. No, it wouldn't be well over a year, but many, many months. And it just disappeared, and nothing else was said about it. Whereas other places, it's getting worse. And actually, we're not going to talk about it this week, but I understand that in British Columbia, specifically, things are getting far worse, specifically for healthcare workers with regard to vaccine mandates, exactly as most of the rest of Canada is at least reinvestigating what it is that they're doing in the wake not of their duplicitous Ken doll of a prime minister, but of the bravery of the truckers in taking on many of the stupid rules and standing strong. Well, I think that all of the stuff is going to come apart. You will notice that we have not, what is the name of that snake oil salesman? Fauci. You will notice that we have not seen much of Anthony Fauci lately, as he is enjoying, basically there was a big puff of squid ink and he vanished into the coral reef and is now moved on.
Is he a moray eel? Is that what he is?
No, I like moray eels. But anyway, as I think the point is, the change of subject is a great relief to people around whom their narrative was collapsing. And I just want to point out one last thing. The arbitrariness, in fact, possibly the explanation for why they set an arbitrary future date and then moved it as the narrative collapsed faster than they expected, has to do with the paradox of Rachel Maddow and how she dealt with, people will remember, there was a moment at which they were dangling masklessness as a reward, as a perk for vaccination. And the idea was, well, if you're vaccinated, you don't very well need a mask because you're both immune and not going to transmit this thing, right? Mm-hmm. So back when that was still the story, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's imagine that they actually believed it at the time. Rachel Maddow had a moment where she said the quiet part out loud on her show, where she was literally trying to grapple with the cognitive dissonance that comes from, wait a minute, now the good people are the ones without masks. Like, how is my little mind going to wrap itself around that update, you know? And so the point is this giving you a month to go through the Rachel Maddow moment and get to a place where it's like, okay, got it. I now know who the good people are. Again, I feel comfortable with it. I'm ready to get rid of this mask. May be the reason that they didn't do an effective immediately. But the point is, these are the kind of people who would not do an effective immediately order, even though the well-being of children depended on it.